one phenomenon that I did see crop up, which is really interesting. I guess we'll just dive right into election night drama. Is this thing called the Red Mirage, and so that basically is the idea that on election night you were going to see a lot more Trump votes coming in from these different states that were counting their votes, as opposed to the mail-in ballots, which has not been counted yet in a lot of states. And so you're going to see a shift in a lot of the swing states from Trump being up to Biden ultimately becoming the winner when all the mail-in votes were counted. Now, some states counted their mail-in votes early, like Florida, so that's why it was called, within hours.
But in Pennsylvania, they have some sort of legislation that says they can't start counting those until, is it election night, or is it until they've counted all the other ballots?
It was something like that. I mean, because they had other ballots coming in, they had provisional ballots, but Pennsylvania, and so that contributed obviously to the effect that a lot of people thought that the election was being rigged, that it was being stolen, because you saw this red shift, but it was a mirage. And a lot of people, data analysts talked about this before the election happened, said this is one possible scenario that could occur. But Biden,
data analyst and Bernie Sanders, who called it exactly.
Exactly. Trump was down significantly in the national popular vote, but also the state-by-state polls. Biden had like a 7 or 8 point lead going into election night, according to Real Clear Politics and Nate Silver's website, 538, and that trimmed up pretty, much big time, because we saw not just the national popular vote narrow up to about 4 points, but in the state-by-state counts, I mean, Trump came from behind to secure victories in like Ohio and Iowa. Those went fast. But in Wisconsin, for example, Biden only won by like points within recount range. It was within recount range in Georgia, Arizona almost. It's very narrow margins. So even though overall Biden won a pretty comfortable victory, it's going to be about 306 electoral votes when the Electoral College meets, he underperformed, and that's something that people need to, I guess, kind of contend with, is the fact that, and especially down ballot, the Democrats did piss poor. I mean,
And well, the great thing about being a Democrat right now is you have absolutely no candidates that represent you.
That is true, and so that's why there was an underperformance, I think, at the national level, because they lost seats in the House, barely have a chance of taking the Senate. If the two runoff races in Georgia, how those go, but. Like the national platform was basically, we are not as bad as Trump, or
well, it was all about Trump.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing that I think a lot of people gloss over when it comes to elections like this. Like, you can talk about how the votes turned out, how close the race was, et cetera, et cetera. But that's sort of like an adjacent point to what do the most people in America actually believe, or what do they actually like hold as their values.
Yeah.
There are more Democrats in the U.S. than Republicans, by far. By far. It's not even close. The issue is they don't vote. They call themselves liberal, they call themselves Democrats, but then when voting day comes, they don't show up. And so the votes are close, but it's not really a good representation of what the country believes.
Yeah.
So, that's its own issue. And I guess you could make the argument that if they're not showing up to vote, do they really care in the first place? I don't know. But, one thing that you heard over and over with this election was there have been more votes cast for these two presidential candidates than ever before in history. And it's like that implies these candidates are better representative of the American people than any candidate before in history, which is, an egregious claim.
Yeah.
I think people never really consider population growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a huge topic when it comes to, this sort of science. I just pulled up a figure here. Every 10 years in the U.S., the population tends to increase by around 10%.
Yeah.
We've got everything from 7%, well, a little higher, 7.7% in 2020 to in 2000 it increased by 13%. So yes, you have more people voting, yet the ratio isn't really changing.
Exactly.
And also, and we can get into wages, and that's a whole other topic, but when you have more people, those people are spreading the resources more thinly. So you can have an economy that is still growing, but if your population is growing too quickly, in spite of that, it can sort of, outpace it. And so then you have more poverty, even though the economy is still doing well. And I think that's something that we haven't really addressed much.
Yeah, and I did the math in 2016. So Donald Trump, he lost the popular vote. He got 46% of the total votes cast. Hillary Clinton got 48%. But if you take that as a percentage of registered voters, Donald Trump only got like 25%.
Yeah.
And Hillary Clinton got like 26%. So, definitely a very small, not a totally insignificant fraction. I mean, obviously there's, tens of millions of people who supported him around this time. But an increasingly small fraction of the country is, actually supports the president, actually, wanted to vote for him. And I think this is one of the big things that we've kind of touched upon. If it were not for COVID-19, it's very likely that Donald Trump would have been reelected just because of how close the state margins were. I mean,
Absolutely.
Again, popular vote, even if Biden still won that, and it is, a pretty crushing victory, tens of millions, or just not tens of millions, but millions more votes, in spite of the fact that he ran on almost nothing, and that's why and we'll probably get into this in a minute, why the Democrats did very poorly in the down ballot races.
Right.
But, it's like you said, it's not representative of the country. And so I do feel like if we had, a better candidate at the top of the ticket, or if we had more parties, then we would have more participation.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention something akin to that. Biden is the most milquetoast candidate you could have possibly chosen.
Absolutely.
And I think that was probably a calculated choice by the DNC. But the problem, I don't think they really understand why they aren't winning.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's not just that they aren't representing their people. It's that those people are like, okay, well, if I have to choose between Biden and Trump, I don't feel like I relate to either of these people. I'm just not going to vote. And that comes from the Democratic side. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, and, the YouTuber, Shion had said about the election, she was trying to encourage people to, vote for Biden if they were not really feeling motivated for the election at all. And, her response was, if you don't vote for Biden because his policies aren't liberal enough, the way the DNC is going to react to that next election is, oh, well, he didn't get enough support. We must go more conservative to flip more conservative voters because liberals aren't voting.
Yeah,
they're not gonna give you Bernie Sanders or Andrew Yang if you aren't coming out in the first place.
Yeah,
and that's coming from someone that was not excited to vote for Biden at all.
Yeah,
in fact, I voted third party.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's like it's it's a complicated topic.
Absolutely, and it kind of reminds me of another argument that you'll hear from people on the left who believe in this thing called accelerationism, which is the idea that if you let Trump win, if you let a Republican win, then that opens up a space for a more left-wing candidate 4 years down the road to come in. Well, we tried that, and it didn't work. So like in 2016, you heard some people like Jimmy Dore on YouTube, who's part of the TYT network, say, look, he didn't advocate openly voting for Trump, but he said, like, look, if Trump wins, then 4 years later, that'll open up an opportunity for Bernie Sanders. So it's true in one sense, because if Hillary Clinton were president, she would have been renominated in 2020. But so Bernie did have a shot, but we saw, like, we actually ran this experiment where we voted, we as in, the Electoral College, voted in the Republican president, and 4 years later, when Bernie ran again, he did worse than he did in 2016 in the primary, and we ended up with Biden. Now, Biden won. I think that's because of the economic situation in the country right now, because generally incumbents don't do well when the economy is in a poor state.
True.
But so it's really a coincidence. But Trump could have easily been reelected. But like if he had been reelected again, then I fear some people would have said, well, look, that'll open up the door for a more progressive candidate down the road 4 years later to come in and correct the wrong track that we've been going down for now 8 years. But we just see that it doesn't play out in reality. So that's why I don't buy into the accelerationist theory. Right. So if I were in a swing state, I would have encouraged people to vote for Biden as well, because and somebody pointed this out the other day. I think it may have been Shoe on Head, it may have been somebody else, but the left tends to actually do better under neoliberal administrations than they do under far-right administrations, because the course correction that the DNC calculated for the Trump era was a centrist like Biden.
Yeah.
Whereas,
and that's another thing that you can bring up. Biden is almost not a liberal. He's barely on the edge of liberalism.
He's barely,
Yeah, I mean, like, this is from the 2008 elections, but when Obama was running and the DNC was worried about, oh my God, we have this crazy liberal socialist black man running for president. Like, how do we make him not seem so scary to your Midwestern white people?
Yeah.
Biden was chosen as the vice president as a moderate option to control Obama.
A counterbalance.
Exactly,
Yeah. And I've actually seen people talk about the 2008 election that if Hillary Clinton had been nominated, and it was very close. The 2008 race was very close in the Democratic primary. She almost won, and she was obviously like the favorite from the beginning. Sure. But if she had won, it's very possible that she would have done better in the Electoral College than Obama did, or at least the same, but she would have flipped different states. Like, she could have brought, Arkansas and Kentucky into play. Now, this sounds alien to us now because Hillary Clinton, over the past 10 years has become the figurehead in right-wing popular culture as like, the Antichrist, But back then, she did better with blue-collar workers. She did better with Midwesterners. And so you could have seen a different coalition. The Senate could have, had a different makeup. Mitch McConnell's race in 2008 was quite close. It was like within 3%, I think. So you could have flipped that seat, and she could have been better at, potentially getting like a tougher economic package through, whereas Obama decided to focus on healthcare reform, and what we ended up with was conservative healthcare reform.
Absolutely.
That has since been undone by the Republican administration. But it's changed so much in the past several years, where she was actually viewed in the 2016 race as the not the good candidate for the working class and for blue collar people, and Bernie Sanders filled that void. And in 2020 in the primary, a lot of Sanders voters flipped to Biden, who live in like rural areas. So that's something I think that going forward, the progressive wing is going to have to deal with, this divide between urbanism and ruralism.
It's interesting you say that. Maybe we're just walking in different circles, but I didn't see a lot of Bernie supporters flip Biden personally.
Yeah,
I saw more flip to Trump than I did flip to Biden, which just shows like most Bernie supporters are kind of like this anti-establishment group. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not saying that Trump is a better choice for them than Biden is. I actually think he's a worse choice for them. Yeah. But you can sort of gear their perspective from that fact.
Yeah. No, there was definitely some Bernie to Trump crossover, just like there was Obama to Trump crossover in the general election. And again, Ohio is another example. Like, it's becoming a red state at this point.
Yeah.
And frankly,
as Texas is becoming blue. Did you see how close that was?
Oh my God.
I thought like, Texas was going to flip there.
It was within 5 or 6 points. Which is a massive shift.
And then, of course, Georgia did.
Yeah, and I was totally surprised about it.
We were all stunned on Georgia.
We were all stunned on Georgia, and Trump lost it twice because the recount came back with Biden staying in the lead. But yeah, I do get a sense that there was a collapse of rural support for Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primary.
Yeah. And
those people did go to Biden.
Well, one more thing about this, the 2020 election, we can move on to another topic if you want. When it comes to registered voters not voting, this is only going to become more prevalent in the future as well. But as of right now, millennials and Gen Z make up 40% of the electorate. And when you look at your potential candidates, okay, Bernie is kind of considered like, oh, well, he's the Gen Z, he's the millennial candidate, and in a lot of ways he represents what they believe, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Bernie was born in 1941. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
We have no candidates that is representative of the group that where their support lies.
Yeah,
That's not, there's a huge disconnect there.
Absolutely.
And the closest one you have there is Andrew Yang, but even he is, other than UBI, he doesn't have a lot that he said that, will really make a Gen Z or a millennial voter excited to vote, I don't think.
Yeah.
And so I think other than just values, I think if the Democrats want a better chance in future elections, they're going to have to nominate people that better represent this group that isn't voting in the first place.
Yeah. I do want to say one more thing about the down ballot races before we move on. Sure. So but this does tie in with who you nominate at the head of the ticket. So a lot of these congressional races, the people that the progressive candidates that supported Medicare for All got reelected. A lot of the ones that did not support Medicare for All lost. And so it really is these bread and butter economic issues that matter to people. And so that's how I think the Democrats going forward could increase their support across the country. And on MSNBC, you'll have people like Claire McCaskill come on and blame, defund the police and Antifa and all this for Democratic losses. Nobody was running on that platform.
Yeah, right. No Democrats ever said that. I mean, my God,
the closest that you got to that at all would be somebody like Cori Bush, who was running on police reform, and she won.
Yeah.
So
in the vice presidential debate, you had Mike Pence and Kamala Harris arguing over who loved fracking more. It's calling these Democrat candidates, these ultra liberal, funded by communists, is like, come on, guys.
No, it's not.
What world are you living in?
No. That Soros money is just not getting through.
I guess not.